This week on Africa Weekly, we'll be in Zanzibar, where the livelihoods of these seaweed farmers has run into troubled waters. And then to Ivory Coast, where it's hoped new schools will keep kids out of the cocoa fields and in the classroom. And to Uganda, where thousands of patients face an agonising wait for cancer treatment after the country's only radiotherapy machine broke. But first, a look at the stories that have been making the headlines this week. South Sudan's rebel chief Riek Machar has been sworn in as vice president after he finally returned to the capital on Tuesday. President Salva Kiir has named his transitional unity government, with the 30 ministerial posts being divided between former rival factions. The UN called it an important milestone on the road to ending a conflict which has left tens of thousands dead and millions displaced. Now the people of South Sudan wait, in the hope that the return of Machar means a return to peace. The body of Congolese rumba king Papa Wemba has arrived home in Kinshasa, greeted by dignitaries, relatives and tens of thousands of fans. The legendary African music star died last Sunday at the age of 66 after collapsing on stage during a music festival in Ivory Coast. This week, officials in Nigeria visited the site where 350 Shiite Muslims were killed in 2015. Last week, Amnesty International accused Nigeria's military of deliberately shooting them, burying them and destroying evidence of the crime. Kenya is making history this week, with Africa's biggest ever ivory burning and a landmark summit. President Uhuru Kenyatta wants the bonfire to mark a turning point in the fight against poaching in Africa, where over 30,000 elephants are killed every year to satisfy demand for ivory, mainly in Asia.
To lose our elephants would be to lose a key part of the heritage that we hold in trust. Quite simply, we will not allow it.
Violence has flared up once more in Burundi. The week began with the assassination of a top Tutsi general along with his wife, and ended with 10 dead after gunmen burst into a bar in Bujumbura. Tensions continue to run high since President Pierre Nkurunziza's controversial decision last April to run for a third term. This seaweed is a precious commodity in Zanzibar, a key export for food, cosmetics and medicines. But warmer waters and declining crops are threatening the livelihoods of thousands of farmers, most of them women.
Mtumwa has been doing this work for 20 years. She's one of more than 20,000 seaweed farmers in Zanzibar. Once dried, the seaweed is exported to China, Europe and the United States, where it's used in cosmetics, medicines and toothpaste, and also eaten.
I'm tying the seaweed seedlings to ropes, then I'll wait for 2 months for them to grow before harvesting them.
The Indian Ocean archipelago is the world's third largest producer of spinosum seaweed, but competition from farmers in Indonesia and the Philippines has led to a fall in prices. In recent years, Zanzibar exported some 16,000 tonnes of seaweed a year, but production for the first few months of this year is half that of the same period last year.
We have to reduce the price. Last year we were buying from the farmer. The price was 600 shilling per kilo. And now the price has come down to 400 shilling in Tanzania. We have to be competitive. Otherwise, they will not buy our seaweed.
But a drop in prices is not the industry's only threat. Worryingly, warmer water, partly due to climate change, is making seaweed more vulnerable to disease, which is affecting crop growth and quality.
The good temperature can be around 27 degrees, 29 degrees. The seaweed can survive. But when it's too hot, it's making the seaweed not to grow very well. And it's dying. So a lot of women have stopped actually cultivating seaweed.
The government has promised to help farmers by improving their equipment. Meanwhile, environmentalists are encouraging farmers to cultivate their crops in deeper, cooler water to minimise infection.
For these kids, this is a new way of life, studying instead of working on the cocoa plantations. Ivory Coast is the world's top producer of cocoa, with 35% of global market share. But in a bid to improve its image and stamp out child labour, the country has implemented a €20 million education action plan. And in the past 5 years, it's opened 155 new state schools and renovated thousands of classrooms.
When it opened in 2013, we had many students in the first class, big kids, 10-year-olds, who hadn't been to school. They managed to catch up, and it stopped them going to the fields.
Between 300,000 and 1 million children work on Ivorian plantations, according to the International Cocoa Initiative, an umbrella group that promotes child rights. In poor, rural areas, it's a way of helping their families. But keeping children out of school also contributes to a cycle of poverty from generation to generation. And the work can be mentally and physically tough, including cutting down trees, spraying pesticides, and carrying heavy loads.
Establishing schools is an important step in eliminating child labour, because once a child's in school, he doesn't have the time to go to the fields, so he can't do that laborious work.
Although families are having to do without the extra help in the fields, the schools are helping to change attitudes.
When I was a child at the age of 5, 6 or 10, I went to the field with my dad, but not today. My kids don't go to the field with me. I sent all my children to school, and it's me who goes to work with my wife in the fields, with my younger brother and my older brother.
In many rural areas, use of child labour continues, though it now carries a potential prison sentence, with 18 people jailed between 2012 and 2014. This cocoa will soon be turned into chocolate, much of it for Western consumption. It's hoped the next generation of children in Ivory Coast will also taste a sweeter future.
Bronia was diagnosed with cervical cancer last year. With help from a charitable hospice organisation, she travelled 300 kilometres to Kampala for treatment using Uganda's only radiotherapy machine. With therapy, she had a good chance of survival. But after waiting for more than 3 weeks, she's been told to go back to her hometown. The machine she was counting on has broken down beyond repair.
I felt pain because I thought that if it works, we are going to be okay and we get to recover.
The radiotherapy machine was a lifeline when it was donated to Uganda 21 years ago. Every year it offered around 30,000 life-saving treatments and gave patients relief from unbearable pain. But it had already broken down several times, and though the government paid €325,000 for a new machine 3 years ago, the bunker for housing it has never been built. Even with the extra funding needed, getting the new machine in place will take time.
If they can even work 24 hours, within 6 months we should have the bunker ready. Yeah, so that means the next half of the year we should be installing the equipment and testing it. So by 1 year it should be up and running.
The government has tried to play down the impact of the breakdown, but for many a year may be too long. And there are accusations that this crisis in cancer care is symptomatic of a wider lack of investment in what's already an ailing health system. So why was the radiotherapy machine allowed to fall into disrepair?
There's a question of money, there's a question of management, there's a question of planning. All these when all these come together, it makes things work. But if one component is missing, of which in this case all are missing, we'll have a problem.
Patients are now being advised to go to neighbouring Kenya for radiotherapy, but many can't afford such an expensive trip. For Bronia, the only option is to go home and wait.
Fighting for a place in this summer's Olympic Games, Popole Misenga is no stranger to hostile environments. A Congolese judoka living as a refugee in Brazil, he hopes to go to Rio as part of the first ever stateless team, made up of athletes from conflict zones. Next week, we'll meet the conservationists fighting to keep Namibia's cheetahs happy. That's all from us at Africa Weekly. Until next week.